Hello everyone, my name is Yvonne Weldon. I am a Wiradjuri woman from Cowra here in New South Wales. I'm from the waters of the Clare and of the Murrumbidgee rivers. The Sydney Festival acknowledges that we gather and share stories on unceded lands. Their stories, their songs, ceremonies and culture are ever present. We thank the generations of caretakers and their descendants for allowing us to be here on their lands, sharing stories that unite and inspire Sydney audiences. Wherever you are gathered during this year's Sydney Festival, remember, you are and always will be on Aboriginal land.
Good evening, and welcome everyone to the Australian Museum. My name is Russell Briggs. I'm one of the directors here. I'd like to also acknowledge that the museum sits on unceded Gadigal land. It always was and always will be. I pay respects to elders past and present. We're delighted to have you here tonight for our first collaboration this year with Sydney Festival. I don't know how many of you for whom this is the first time since we redeveloped this entire area here. It's made it a beautiful space for having talks like this and activities. And we've got a whole weekend, the next few days planned with Edward Burtynsky, who you'll be hearing from in a moment, in this hall and in our newly developed theater over here. So I encourage you to enjoy the museum while you're here, but also to come back and see a few things. We're really honored to have Edward here tonight. The themes of his work integrate so closely with the kind of work this museum does. The urgency of awakening people to the need to combat climate change is embedded within his work, but it's also embedded within everything that we do as well. And we've got climate change is sort of part of everything that we're doing right now. We've got a new exhibition that's starting in a couple of weeks on sharks, but really it's not the sensationalistic part of sharks, but it's about living with sharks and biodiversity and what it means to be able to live in this world and be part of a world where there are other apex predators, and that can be a good thing. And we'll hope you all come back to be able to see that exhibition as well. We've got a number of different collaborations with Sydney Festival we'll be doing over the next few months. Something special related to that shark exhibition that we'll be able to tell you about soon in January. But in the meantime, I hope you'll enjoy yourself tonight. And right now, I'm going to introduce the director of the Sydney Festival, Olivia Ansell, to introduce our guest tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Russell. And I too acknowledge elders past and present of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Born in Canada of Ukrainian heritage, Ed has spent 40 years capturing humanity's impact on the planet. His extraordinary aerial photography covers everything from coal mining, textiles industry and oil farming, right through to rapid urbanisation and dramatic landscapes. His art is poetic and at the same time devastatingly haunting. Ed's latest work, In the Wake of Progress, which combines these powerful photographs and film footage, is playing right here in Sydney nightly from 5 p.m. till 10 p.m. until September 18, right up on Oxford Street, adjacent to Taylor Square. Co-produced by Canadian music legend Bob Ezrin, who has collaborated with Pink Floyd, Peter Gabriel and Lou Reed, and set to a stirring original score composed by award-winning composer Phil Gould, featuring First Nations artist Iskwē, is the result of a deeply moving experience for viewers. Now 46 years old, the Sydney Festival is the largest international arts festival in the Southern Hemisphere. We present the world's best artists, brightest minds and boldest ideas. We, like our friends here at the Australian Museum, are cultural leaders, facilitating artistic exchange that explores all aspects of humanity and the environment. And in that context, we are standing here tonight, not in summer, during our normal time for the Sydney Festival, but right now, because we believe in important and urgent conversations. I'd like to thank Investment New South Wales for supporting this program via the 24-Hour Economy Commission, headed up by Mike Rodriguez, and the Australian Museum for partnering with us. Tonight's event is being live streamed to our website at sydneyfestival.org.au and will also be available on demand once tonight's event has concluded. So please share it with your friends and tell them to jump online and enjoy the talk. It's now my pleasure to introduce host James Valentine, ABC Radio Sydney's much-loved breakfast presenter, a lifetime member of the Even Greater Sydney Planning Committee, 80s rock band icon, even as a saxophonist, and someone I consider a great mate, along with my new friend Edward Burtynsky, who has travelled here all the way from the Arctic Circle. So please join me in making them feel welcome.
Hello. Hi, how are you? Great to be here. Excellent. Excuse me, I'll just put my phone down here so I've got a clock. So otherwise we'll be here till 11. Well, so that's too late for me now. I won't be here till then. Fantastic to have you here, and it's really great to be here. I've had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with Ed already. I know it's going to be a really terrific conversation. We'll perhaps start, we'll show the trailer in just a minute, but tell us how In the Wake of Progress came about. We have COVID to thank, I understand, for it.
Yeah, well, for the new improved version of the piece, but originally it started about 3.5 years ago when the Luminato Festival, a similar festival to the Sydney Festival in Toronto, approached me and said, would you take over all of the screens of Dundas Square, which is Toronto's version of Times Square. There are 22 screens. So I asked Naomi whether, she was the artistic director, whether that had ever been done, and she didn't think that a complete takeover of all the screens had occurred. So I started with that, and I was supposed to present in June 2020, but of course, we all saw what happened in February, March of 2020. It got postponed, and then as soon as it was postponed, I thought, this piece would be easier to kind of understand and put together as an indoor experience, or at least a 3-screen experience, and then I could take that and break it into the smaller screens on Dundas Square. Right. So then I got another year on top of that, and that's when Bob Ezrin and we started to look for a bespoke score for it. So with that extra year, we put music to it and had a composer put it together, Phil Strong, and Isque, the First Nations singer who did the beautiful vocals for it. And so then we had a whole other year to kind of perfect it. So now it's not only an outdoor experience, but it can also be an indoor experience. So when we showed it in Toronto, it was, if you go to Taylor Square, that's about a 1/3 version of the indoor Toronto version, which was about 130 feet of
You sort of sit in the middle of it, don't you?
Yeah, and so it's very immersive. Yeah. And it's not like a Van Gogh immersive, it's more of a surround multimedia, video, stills, and music experience.
Yeah. Let's take a look. Scoutsy and those films of the human interaction then combined with music. Were they an influence on you?
Well, actually I did refresh myself, and I was thinking about kind of non-verbal filmmaking as well. And so Baraka, Koyana Squatsi, there's another one called Kronos, and I knew some of the people that worked on those films. This is a much more condensed version because, again, when I was conceiving it for the Square, the idea was that you might be coming from a shopping center and with your merchandise, or you're just crossing over the square, and much like Taylor Square, and all of a sudden you weren't expecting it, and you're caught up in this kind of piece. And I like that idea of like bringing art out of the art gallery and just bringing it to the street. And I do love that engagement. So that's very, it was conceived. And so 20 minutes was, actually the piece is 23 minutes long, but it felt like something that you would stand through, something that you would just pay attention to and be there for 20 minutes. So, whereas something like Coin and Scottsy's, 2 hours or something.
Days. So you're there forever.
Days. Philip Glass just going on, going
just going on, arpeggio after arpeggio. So it's tedious. This is, and in the wake of progress, I mean, that's a summary of the theme of your life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it occurred to me early in my career when I wanted to break out as an artist and say, I don't want to be a commercial artist, I want to be an artist working thematically with an idea, creating my own projects, researching them, funding them, getting out there, doing them. And nature was my first love, and a love affair with nature, and then even the piece, is buttressed with nature at both, like the pristine ancient forests at both ends of the piece. But I really wanted, to take my camera and bear witness to the other side of our lives. We live in cities, we live in homes, we get in our car, we get in the plane, we get in the train, our institutions, everything, but all of this, everything's possible as a result of us taking things from nature and converting them to our lives. And so we understand that our world that we live in, but we become totally disconnected from the other world that provides for all of that. So I felt, 40 years ago that this was a big enough idea that I can kind of train my camera onto that and make it a life's work.
Yeah, I think this is extraordinary that you have that sort of vision back then and still doing it now. Let's just take a look at young Ed here in love with nature. A Canadian with a canoe, it's like an Australian with a kangaroo, really, isn't it? It's an Australian with a cricket bat.
The only thing that's missing is that there's not a beaver in the picture.
There should be a beaver or a moose, a Mountie coming down just to check what you're up to. Where were you headed then?
So this is one up in northern Ontario, on one of my favorite rivers, and as soon as in my very first job when I was 17, my very first paycheck, I went out and bought a canoe, and my buddy bought a car, and we went up north immediately after our first paycheck, and then I just had the freedom of saying, I loved it. I loved camping. I loved that reference point. And I think, Canada, like Australia, former British colony, lots of resources that, it's a resource, country. And also nature was, most of it was, unpopulated.
Yeah.
It's these vast tracts of nature. So, I had the privilege of being able to experience what the planet intended for that place in the world. Those are the trees, and these haven't been transformed by humans. So it gives you that reference point, and I felt that was really important as a kind of an early lesson, even though I didn't understand how profound it was, but to have an appreciation and a love of that place and to understand it, and to understand what's being lost to human progress.
And was this family? Did the family go camping? Did the family go up?
Yeah, well, my father was an outdoor. I remember from age 3, he would take me into the forest mushroom picking, and he loved fishing, and we'd go for smelt runs, and so he introduced me to the forest, to fishing, and to art. He loved art as well, and so all of that was kind of part of my early DNA, that it just felt natural to paint, draw, photograph, and be in nature.
Yeah. Now, I love this tale. This is you again. There's some photographic paper there, I think, right in the front.
Yeah.
And tell us the story of this moment, because it's quite extraordinary, isn't it? You're given an assignment at about this age, I imagine, and this is the theme of your life.
Yeah, so I got there. So St. Catharines is in the Great Lakes, and Lake Ontario is the last lake that then empties out into the St. Lawrence River, which ends up in the Grand Banks, and one of the greatest fisheries, was one of the greatest fisheries in the world. But so I was in St. Catharines, and at 20, I decided to, or 21, I decided to move to Toronto. Really, basically, I was in college, and one of my photography teachers in the photography class said, and I was already taking pictures for almost a decade, just amateur. I loved it, and I developed pictures in my darkroom. And he said, you know, you have a kind of a natural aptitude. You know, all the assignments you come back with are so far above anybody else is doing. You should go. You know, he thought I could make a profession out of it. And he said, you should go to Ryerson. It's got the best program in the country for photography. And it was just, you know, an hour away from St. Catharines. So I picked up and moved. And a teacher that I had, and you know, to me, it really reminds me of the importance of a great instructor. And we really hit it off. And one of his first assignments is, you know, go out and photograph evidence of man. And it was kind of something that I just locked into a way of thinking, and I think what that meant was that, to me, was that I got a kind of a hall pass on, like I could be an alien observing humans and what they're doing. Right. And so I started to think that way and say, if I had to bring back images to another intelligent species about how we were kind of reshaping the planet or what we were doing to the planet, what would be the images that I would make? And
but it's a remarkable question, isn't it? It's a fantastic question. It's not really a photographic assignment. It's not a reporting assignment. It's not an art assignment necessarily. You can do what you like with that.
It's wide open.
Go out and bring me evidence of man. What a fantastic question to be given.
Yeah, you could just wake up and just photograph whatever's in front of you, and that's evidence of humans, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
that's right. Your feet.
So it's kind of like everywhere all the time. Yeah. But it's another thing to start thinking about it. I started thinking about it is that in that kind of front line where we're kind of reshaping the natural world, where we're usurping it for our own use, that's evidence of us reshaping. So, you know, by and large, or by far, the biggest thing that we've done to reshape the planet is farming. Right. So if you look at terra firma, all land above the oceans, and if you kind of subtract the Antarctica, then about 27% of all that land has been converted to farmland. So that used to be forests or prairies, wetlands, all of that, and that is now all farmland. So that, you know, if you look at urbanism, it's like 1%. Yeah, right. You know, so by far the thing that we've done that has changed the nature of this planet is farming.
And was that the first photo you took? Did you take a photo?
I did farming, but the problem at the time, it's kind of a silly problem, but when you're driving along a road and you take out a camera and you shoot a cornfield, it looks like a cornfield on the side of a road. You can't tell that this is vast. Yeah. So it's only as I progressed and I started using aircraft and getting up with drones and getting up with helicopters and planes that all of a sudden photographing agriculture started to make sense because it's such a large scale.
So this is an early one?
That's not 1981.
Right.
And I was still kind of interested in doing a whole series on just looking at nature. I was interested in the fact that I was using large format, so immediately I went to large format, 4x5, 8x10 negative color. And that's 1976, 77. So, you know, color was largely not even seen as an art medium. It was a commercial medium at the time.
It always looks artier in black and white.
It was black and white, You're not an artist if you're not doing black and white.
It's a serious statement in black and white.
Yeah, and at that time, it was 35 millimeter street photography. If you weren't doing that, you weren't doing anything serious.
Right. So you weren't hip. There was nothing fashionable about this.
Oh no, my teachers were saying, you're talented. Why are you taking a commercial medium color and photographing landscape? And I went, because I want to. Yeah. That's what I want to do. Yeah. So it wasn't hip. It was kind of really off, what everybody else was doing. Yeah. But I felt, to do color at the time felt pioneering. Yeah. It's like there's no artist that was working with color, because it was largely, used for shooting photographs of cars, perfume bottles, booze bottles, whatever. Right. It was like that high-end, medium. And I took that same tool and started photographing landscape.
Yeah. Why'd you have that strength, do you think? Why'd you have that strength of vision and that strength of character? Be able to go, no, this is what I want.
Well, I think very early on, I thought that a path to an original idea and an original voice was to kind of learn about because we're not born out of a void. So you learn about art history, you learn about, photography and the history of photography, and anything you can, you just, soak it all up. And then you kind of strike out into the place that you're passionate about, that means something to you. And I felt that just by trusting the things that made me want to get up in the morning to get my camera and got me excited was all I needed. But if I was I went and tried street photography and it did nothing. It wasn't me. So I just trusted my instincts, and I trusted my passion. That this is what gets me out. This is what gets me excited. So when I frame it, I've got something. So that early kind of work that I was doing, and I think the very last image when we look at these series, I was thinking of abstract expressionism, Pollock, and that complexity and the texture, color, flattening of space, color field painting, all of that. I was trying to do that, but trying to find it with a large format camera in nature. So that's really what I was doing. And then back at that image of, I was doing that series, but you go to the previous image. I was doing that series of that compression and looking for that kind of landscape. And I made a wrong turn, and I ended up in this coal area in Pennsylvania called Frackville. And
it's called Frackville.
Frackville, yeah.
It's another name we have for New South Wales, the regional parts in particular.
And I kind of, because I made the wrong turn on the highway, by the time I figured out where I was, it was quicker to cross over, right, on a small secondary highway, and I ended up in this town. And I stopped on this hill, right where that is. I stopped and I started looking around, and everything had been transformed by humans. It was like a coal area, and these are all the slag hills from the residual stuff that doesn't have value, and they just make these slag hills. And and these birches are pushing their way through it. And I kind of looked at that and started photographing it, and I'd never thought of that, the transformed landscape, as a subject. I was looking at the pristine landscape, but not the transformed landscape. And I went back, and the way I worked at that time, I'd work in the fall, and then in the winter I printed at home, and I had these drums, and it was an arduous process. And I was doing all these landscapes, and then I was going through my contacts, and I saw these again, and I started printing them. And that was kind of like a eureka moment. It was like, wait, this is really actually more interesting. I think the key thing also was that it said to me that, if I look at the other work I was doing, I can, there was artists like Elliot Porter and Ansel Adams and Edward Weston, which I loved all of their works. And I said, I'm just really extending what they're doing. But in this work, it feels more connected to the time I'm in, that this is meaningful. I started thinking about, we were all talking about the population explosion, and at that time we were even like 3.5 billion. So it was just kind of like, wow, we're in this kind of wild growth of never unprecedented growth. As a top predator species on the planet, and having like this, explosion. And I thought, this transformation, the way we're going to transform the planet is going to be profound. So I thought if I just kept tacking in that direction, eventually the zeitgeist might meet me.
But what's interesting is that you had that vision, but then you don't go to it as a photographic journalist or someone reporting on it or someone bringing back the most graphic images of what's going on. You bring back these beautiful images. You go to it as artist.
Well, I kind of thought, first off, it's not hard to make a terrible, ugly picture. It's pretty easy, and I don't think people engage with that. I think, maybe it's deserving of that, but I don't necessarily think that engagement happens. And so what I wanted to create is, in the same way if somebody asked me to go and photograph the city, I would look for the moments in the city where it becomes cohesive and compositionally kind of accessible. And and beautiful was never really the word I was trying to use to go. I was looking for the visually compelling, the image that invokes a sense of wonder, like, where am I? What is this? What am I looking at? And
but you compose. I mean, we're looking at this is deforestation. I can't remember where that is. Is that in?
That's in Nigeria, in the Niger Delta. So
Nigeria.
these are all trees being brought down the river.
But if I glance at it, it's just beautifully composed. Like when I say beautiful, I just mean it's got all the rhythm of a work. It's got all the, balance that you want from a work. And in fact, as I was looking through your work, I started to go, would you feel a conflict between you making it too beautiful? There's too much art going on here.
Not really. I mean, I think. Like I started as a kid painting, and you're trying to make something that you want to and I had an early art teacher also said, if you want to understand where the current kind of zeitgeist is, go in museums and watch people and go in a room and see where people will stop the most. And then go and look at that painting because there's something going on there. Learn from it, and I was then I studied a bit of Jung and this archetypes that we see things similarly, so we respond in similar ways. So I kind of attenuated my thinking to the fact that if I experience it a certain way, I can kind of make, I'll know if I do like 8 views of a particular subject and do variants on it, but I will actually respond to one of them more than the other 7, then I'm trusting that what's happening in my own mind and what's happening into my visual response to it, is similar to what would happen to you if you saw it, or anybody else. So that I'm trying to move to what I believe is a kind of something in the collective consciousness that we all connect to in a way. So I'm always interested in connecting, through my work. It's there to be to transmit an idea, and I'm not trying to obfuscate the idea. I'm trying to connect with the idea.
Yeah, and it's not a didactic kind of message. I mean, we're looking here at a bunch of, these are greenhouses in Spain. I don't know that we have this style of agriculture here, like that this is, vast acres covered in sort of plastic and glass.
Yeah, and this is, it's in southern Spain, and it's supplying most of Europe with, fruits and vegetables and strawberries and berries all year round. So yeah, it's super large scale greenhouses. But again,
but my point, I suppose, is that I don't feel like you're presenting that, and I'm meant to know exactly what it is that you want me to get one thing from it necessarily. Isn't this bad? We shouldn't have fruit all the year round. This is destroying a natural landscape or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not, my work isn't about indictment. It is very much about, I don't use Photoshop, I don't extend, I don't change the image. So everything I photograph is a place I can take you to and say, this is where I shot it from and this is what it looks like. So there is subjectivity in the point of view and the time of year and the way I compose it and the lens I use, and there's 100 little things that, stylistically align it with my way of seeing, which is something I've developed over the years. But, but again, I'm trying to create a body of work that moves from refineries to greenhouses to agriculture to mining to quarrying to manufacturing and photographing dams, but yet somehow, and it's almost inexplicable that it's still the same kind of the same style or the same vision that carries through.
Yeah. What is there a predecessor? Have you found a predecessor? I'm sort of thinking of the kind of things. We here, our CSIRO, which is our science unit, our government science body, would make these sort of great films about Australian progress. Here's our fine car factory, this sort of stuff. And you'd see the production line and it'd be full of energy. There'd be that sort of thing. Or somebody might do photos of workers coming out of a coal mine or the factory gate. Is there much precedent for what you've done, what you've achieved?
I don't think any, it would be surprising because it's something where, again, what I said earlier, I'm following my own instincts. And even in the early work, to get to the kind of style or the feel of what I wanted it to be would be like I'd go out and photograph for a whole day or even for a whole trip and come back and I'd find one image that really just stands above the rest. And then I would take that image and pin it up and say, how do I better that? And then how do I better that? So I'm kind of using my own work to find that, and I believe by doing that, yes, there are influences, but by doing that, by letting my work tell me where to go, that I had a better chance of coming up with an original approach to it.
Yeah.
So I think it is a kind of a unique way to get there. And then, and one day I'd wake up and say, I'm going to go photograph steel scrapyards. I didn't even know at the time when I was doing that somehow it connected into everything else I was doing. It just seemed like a great idea.
Yeah.
And then it was only years later when I had a survey show in 2003 at the National Gallery in Canada that I started to see all these connections. And when I was doing them, it was like discrete projects. I'm going to do refineries. So I'm going to do, steel recycling,
right.
and I'm going to do this, and and I didn't see necessarily at that time how the connective tissue even worked. It was later that started to appear to me.
Yeah. I've got sort of 3 pictures here of cities. One's Lagos in Nigeria, one's the Santa Ana Freeway in California, and one in Shanghai. Tell me how you see a city. Tell me even sort of some of the techniques for getting these sort of images. Is this all choppers?
It's choppers, and again, I'm trying to kind of have depth, but at the same time flattening the field, so so that there's a compression at the same time, great depth and compression in the piece, and trying to show again, like at the time, like if you look at that image, that's L.A. So L.A. still stands as the greatest urban sprawl, where the whole city was designed for the automobile. That its transit system was kind of shut down by Goodyear Tire. It's a great story. They bought up the public transit saying we could run it better, and then shut it down a year later so that people would buy their tires with cars. And not necessarily a largely known story, but it's a true story. And so everything is just sprawl, urban sprawl. So it still stands as one of the most sprawling cities in the world. Yeah. And if you've ever been to LA, it doesn't make sense to do LA with anything but a car. It's a car city. And then this is Makoko, and so in each case, like before that, Shanghai was the fastest growing city, and then this is Lagos in Nigeria, and it's currently the fastest growing city. And so when in my research, every subject is usually there because it represents the largest, fastest growing example of
you like that, don't you? It's the biggest. It's the biggest.
Because there's something surreal that happens in there, and there's something that, again, going back to the evidence of man, if I had to send something to another alien, I'd say this is the fastest growing and the biggest city. This is the biggest example of a dam in the world in China, the Three Gorges Dam. So these are the scale that we're operating at. This is what we're doing as a collective species.
I suppose I'm harping on a bit about this, but the uniqueness of the position is what's so interesting. It's not that you're saying, this is the biggest thing and this is a scandal upon humanity, or this is the biggest thing and look how great we are. It's a more neutral position all the time. It's just like, this is a big thing. Like, let's look at this, the super pit. This is Australia. This is Western Australia. That's the Kalgoorlie super pit in the mine, which I think is one of the biggest.
It's destined to become the largest pit in the world.
Yeah. But it's, in a sense, you'll just present. There it is. Make of that what you will.
Yeah, because it is that that, like, I shot this with an 8x10 camera at the time, so it's a piece of film like this, and so when you actually stand in front of the big prints that they're like 5 foot. A meter and a half by 2 meters, and you can see every stone, every pebble, every little mine shaft hole. You can go in there and dig in with your eyes and kind of look through the whole surface of it and see all kinds of stuff in there. So the actual prints really do. There's a reason to go and see the prints. Because I make them 8x10, and they're just loaded with information. So. I always say there's 2 viewings of it. First, you go and appreciate like the overall composition and how the whole thing feels, the scale of it and all that. And then there's a whole second layer that you walk in and you go like 6 inches away or a foot away from it and explore it, because there's a lot to find in my images in that second reading at a close distance to it. So. And that's what's interesting when you have scale too, because it's just layered with information. Yeah. And I also find, like, if you're coming from the history of art, there are lots of references to the history of art. If you're a geologist, you'll see things in there differently. If you're a mining expert, you're going to get a whole other read out of that as well. Yeah. Or if you just love texture, shape, composition, line, you can enjoy it on that level too.
Yeah. Well, these are silver lakes in Western Australia. Now, imagine that the owners of the mine might be quite happy with these. They're like, yeah, that's what we made. These are beautiful portraits of our work.
Yeah, well, I worked as a miner to put myself through school.
Right.
So I know the language and the nomenclature in Northern Ontario, Campbell Red Lake Gold Mines, which was the richest gold mine in Canada. So I worked for 6 months to put myself through school.
Right.
So I knew, I knew about mining. I'd seen open pit mines before I photographed them. And most miners weren't, like mining companies weren't threatened by me because I would say, I'm here because I've done my research and you're one of the largest. So I did this, but Kalgoorlie was the reason why I got there because it was destined to become one of the biggest open pit mines. So I'd say, okay, I'm here because I photographed the largest examples. I'd know who the second and third were, and I'm saying if you don't kind of let me go, I'm going to go to them.
Right, right.
And eventually somebody's going to let me in.
Yeah.
And I think by and large, because I've always been careful not to use my work as activism or indictments to say, what you're doing is wrong or bad. And I think that's too simplistic as well, because we do need iron and we do need, silver, and we do need, a lot of these materials to create the world that we live in. So, when you say cease and desist, does that mean, what does that mean? Does that mean
your very instrument is made from the products of mining, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not a clear-cut wrong or right. This is what it is. And it's heading in a difficult direction, but it's there is human ingenuity and technology that it's allowing us to create this world and to have a cell phone and all of that. So it's not a simple right or wrong. It's how we go about it, I think, is important, how we manage the resources. So I do think so I do say that, and I say I'm here because, in China, I'm here because you're building the largest dam in the world. And I need access to it, and I need unbridled access. I need to be there at the time of day, the point of view. I can't have resistance. I need to do whatever I want, and then I'll get something that's interesting. But if you try to, hold me back, I'll be limited. And I actually looked publicly at that time when I was in China. I looked at all the images that were available for the Three Gorges Dam, and I had examples of it. And I said, this is the historic record of your dam, and they're all lousy pictures.
Right.
And then I showed them my portfolio. I say, this is what I've done in the past with industry. I can do this to the dam. I specialize in this. And they get it.
Yeah.
And they say, okay, you got full access.
Off you go. Yeah. And so tell me something about that sort of process, because, maybe we can look at this and think, you pop up at the chopper, you're leaning out, snap, okay, back for a beer. It's what I was getting particularly from reading the book, it's almost a little bit more like wildlife photography. You have to wait.
You wait for the light. Like even when I go there, my first research is what is it, and then my next bit of research is time of year. What's the time of year for that? When's the light the best? When's it going to be a bit of? I like overcast, or sometimes I want sun. Depends what the subject is. So what's the time of year? What's the time of day? What's the height of it? Because at different heights, it appears quite differently too.
Sorry, do you mean that with the height of where it is
the helicopter
above sea level? Or?
Yeah, no, the height. Like, am I going to be at 600 feet to shoot it, or am I going to be 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet?
Right.
So all these decisions I'm making before, because once you get the helicopter pilot there, you don't want to be guessing.
Yeah.
Or just you have to do a little bit of exploration, but you want to be near what it is that you want, and you need to have a lot of the things solved. The light, the time of year, the color. If you do agriculture, which I did in the Texas Panhandle, and I actually went different times of year. So when they plow all the fields, there's a color of the earth.
Right.
When the fields are all, in full bloom and the plants are all up, it's green. in the late fall when they've cut them. It's stubble, but they haven't turned the soil yet. So each one of those presents completely different imagery.
Yeah.
So you have to really again decide when, where, and time of year and time of day.
Are there technology questions? Are you someone who, do you have a vast range of cameras? It'll be something different for aerial above a mine, something else for being in a forest?
Yeah, I have a fair amount, but once I get down to my work, I've got a pretty simple, reduced, not too complicated package. But I also do, when I go on, like in my last 15 years, I go in with video camera, I'm going in with drones, I'm going in with, I do 360 VR, I do, photogrammetry, so I'm doing three-dimensional work, and so I have all these.
And then you do a TikTok, and then,
Yeah, not there yet.
Not yet.
Not yet, not yet.
Yeah. There's not a lot of people. I mean, I'm going to show some manufacturing shops, which are kind of, this is of factories, and then we've got these sort of shots of people, but in a sense there's not a lot of people in photography. It's not like you put a person in the corner to show the scale or something like that, or people are not that present in your work.
No, and it's been really about it's kind of implicit that people have made this world.
Right.
And if it doesn't help the piece, then I won't put it. Sometimes people are in there to really set off scale. In this case, this is a Chinese factory making cell phones, and I actually asked them all to look at the camera. I said, everybody stop, because the lines were moving and everything.
Right.
I said, okay, everybody stop the lines, everybody stop, and everybody look at me. And it was kind of like looking across from the west to China, and you're making all our stuff.
Right.
And here's looking at you, it's like,
yeah.
and we're looking at each other across this kind of gulf of, and this is globalism kind of at play.
Is this a while ago? Would you get into China now and be able
I wouldn't be able to get a fraction of what I got in China. I was doing this in 2001 and 2, and then I went for about a dozen trips over a decade and a half. So even my last trip was so restrictive. So, and today, my key person there who helped me get into all these places, he's left China because he's like, I couldn't work in there anymore. And he said, if I try to do what I did, he said you'd get 1/10 of what you got, and it would cost you 10 times.
Yeah. Is the world more restrictive now? Is that the same?
A lot. It's interesting, as I was doing this in the wake of progress, I was looking at, I did a lot of work in the wake of progresses from Russia. I did a stuff in northern Norilsk, northern Siberia. Well, I'm Ukrainian, so that's not going to work. And China no longer. It's become like, I looked at half of what I've done in my career, I wouldn't be able to go back to. That's no longer, photographers or opening those doors are no longer viable. There's a lot more anxiety, a lot more fear of media, fear of things getting out, social media, and so there's a lot of these factories and companies see little or no upside.
Yeah, you might have had a golden age. You mentioned you're Ukrainian. Your parents came from Ukraine?
Yeah, both.
And
they're both displaced by the Second World War.
And how did they get to Canada? Did they get to Canada?
Yeah, they got to Canada, and then they were up in the far north, and then from Kapuskasing is about kind of not far north, but quite high up. And it lasted the highway up in northern Ontario.
What sort of age were they when they arrived?
My mother was, I think she was like 27, something like that.
Right.
So she was taken by the Germans when she was 17. Basically, they were going into Ukraine, and it's funny because they were under Stalin rule, and they had just finished the Great Starvation during the Depression in Ukraine. Stalin went in there with a collective and took all the food and said we're going to redistribute, but they never came back. And they did that 2-3 years in a row. And they figured the loss was about 10 million Ukrainians died of starvation during that 2-3 year period. So my mother lived through that. and then and so Stalin wasn't considered their hero in any way, and actually there was a feeling for a moment that when the Germans came, they were liberating him from the Russians, which were and that didn't work out either. So then my mother, when she was 17, was put in a train, taken to Germany, and like they did with a lot of the youth out of Ukraine, and they put them on work farms to feed the war effort for the soldiers. They needed people to work the farms, so they took the youth in Ukraine and literally enslaved them. And then when the war was over, she spent 5 years. So she was like 25 or something when she got to when she.
And
got
did they speak to you of that? Did they speak Ukraine or Russian in the house?
And then Ukrainian. That was my first language actually. I was fluent. I could still speak it. So it was the language that we spoke in the house.
And you've been?
What's that?
Have you been to Ukraine?
No, I was planning to go in 2020, and then COVID hit.
Right, and you've never been?
Never been.
Yeah.
I've been around the world.
You've been around the world.
Several times.
Not back there,
Yeah, and I was planning to, and then COVID hit, and then I was going to go the following year in 21, and then the COVID was still on the go, and then the war started, so it's a problem.
Yeah. What's your reaction to that? Is it like, do you see it through the eyes of your parents in some ways? Here's Russia back again? Here's Stalin back again in Ukraine? Well,
I mean, Ukraine's just had a very difficult history. I mean, it's always fought wars. It's always had to defend its borders. And even my mother, when she came, she's still alive. She's 98, and she came, and and when we were in St. Catharines, she was the president of the Women's League for the Freeing of Ukraine back when it was still under the Iron Curtain, and raised a lot of money for them through selling pierogies and cabbage rolls and whatever. So it's been a passion of hers, and then to see this is pretty terrible. To see that this, it seems I think most people see it as a kind of a senseless, like why this is like some former past glory that they're in search of and Putin's in search of. So it's that amount of misery and grief for such a failed idea. It just seems somehow it doesn't fit in 2022. It just seems so out of sync.
We're going to take some questions from you in a moment or two. I think the microphone is, wave at me where it is. Is that the microphone over there? So I'll get you to come to the microphone when you've got a question in. I'll take those in about 10 minutes. So if there's something you've been wanting to speak about, I'll ask you to raise your hand. Oh, there it'll be. The microphone will be there. So I'll send you over to there in a little moment or two if you've got questions for Ed this evening. Finish with some these are sort of pretty compelling images. This is where, you've done the manufacturing, you've done the mining. This is where everything ends up. This is the final resting place of our stuff. The tyres, plastics recycling, and then the stunning shipbreaking series, which I think they were the image I knew the most of yours. I think when I saw those, I went, oh, that guy. Oh, he's the guy that did that. Oh, wow, So this is, in some ways, this is the most powerful. This is saying, look at our junk.
Yeah, look, and that nothing really goes away. We discard it, but it's still molecules working within a system, and what is it? Somebody once told me the things that we as humans create more than anything else in the world is waste. It's our number one kind of product is waste. And
you've been to some of those places too, so like horrific places where our waste is ending up.
Yeah, I mean, I went and followed where all our computers go in China, and it was horrific watching, what was happening, how they're breaking down basic computers and. They're cooking the boards, so they have a pair of pliers and leather gloves, and they're cooking these boards and pulling off all the chips, and then they have little, old grandmas are breaking the chips and using tweezers and pulling out all the metals out of these chips, and and it's all painstaking, and putting them in a little, pop can that's open, and they got the different materials that go into those, and the whole day they might come up with 10 ounces of stuff out of a computer, Right. And the baking of the boards, all the smoke coming off the boards was carcinogenic, but they're doing it in their houses, and in the whole town, you start to 5 kilometers before you hit the town, the acrid smell of baking boards is there, and or shipbreaking, and the shipbreaking work in Bangladesh was, I remember coming away from it. It's like I've seen kind of what Dickens saw at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the satanic mills. It's like no regard for environment, no regard for human life or labor or anything. There's no safety rules, and so the breaking of the largest vessels that we make as humans, oil tankers, and then breaking it down with just a cutting torch and guys in flip-flops and no cutting, no glass cutting.
And I suppose in my mind, I think, with my phone, when it goes, I've recycled my phone. Isn't that terrific? I'm doing the right thing. Good on me. And from that all through to the ship, I think there's some sort of organised process around this. I think there's some sort of nice factory, people being paid properly to pull this stuff apart.
No. And shipbreaking was, because in a way, my work, as I progressed, I realized that it's about something else. I'm following globalism, and globalism in its most reductive form is multinational corporations chasing 3 things: cheap labor, lax environmental laws, and tax-free zones. And when you put those 3 together, and Nike was the leader in a way for that one. And Stanford, the CEO of Nike, that was his paper saying, I can go to a place like China in one of these special economic zones. I'm not paying tax there. I can set up shop. I can make, use the same. So all the machinery that we developed here, we just unbolted from the floor, put it on a ship, bolted to a concrete floor in China. Use Chinese labor, train them, and pay instead of a regular salary with benefits and taxes taken off for services, and keeping roads and schools and everything running. All that stripped away, and then I make a pair of running shoes that pretty much look the same as the ones that were made there. You come back to the marketplace, and your running shoe is 40% less than Adidas, every bit as good, and 40% less than Adidas, and it's more profitable than Adidas, even at the 40% less. That is globalism. So if you're Adidas, you go. Or you're out of business. You have to follow suit.
And all that pollution can stay in China. As waste, it can go back to China or down to Africa and places like that. So we're outsourcing everything.
And so that's what's happening, on the ground. And so the workers in America are losing their job, or in the West are losing their jobs, for sure. But here's the other side of it. I think if we didn't have globalism, inflation would have been a much bigger thing. Our durable goods are cheap, and they've been kept cheap because of globalism. But if we had to, put all those externalities back in and make it here, a pair of running shoes is going to be like $400.
Or we'd be back when you had a pair of shoes and you kept them for 30 years and had them repaired. You only had 2 pairs of shoes.
Because they were made
the shoes
well.
were expensive, and that sort of stuff. The fridge was expensive because you were going to keep it for forever. So a little more of the shipwrecking. You do eventually get back to nature. There is still something in you that wants to just photograph a beautiful river.
And in the water project, what I did a project over 10 years on water, and that's Iceland, and I wanted to go back and with water, I felt, I had been doing at that point 30 plus years of, looking at how we've usurped nature in a way, but I wanted to somehow say in water, like anything, to me water was this kind of miraculous substance that, of course, is the source of all life on the planet. And if we didn't have it, we wouldn't be sitting here. I think the opening sentence of my water book is, water is the reason we can say its name. And this kind of idea that consciousness is a direct result of uninterrupted cell division for 3.5 billion years to allow us to be sitting on stage and having a conversation. So this idea of water and the power and the kind of reverence that I began to have for its importance and to all life. And so at the end of the book, of the water book, I wanted to kind of, go back myself as an artist and just kind of, enjoy the pure wonder of water, and the fact that it's a renewable resource, left alone. A river left alone 5, 10, 15 years, it could be the most polluted river in the world. Leave it alone, don't put anything back in, and let the self-cleansing power of, evaporation leaves all the pollutants behind, comes down as pure water, and 10, 15 years you can take a cup of water and drink out of that river that was polluted. So it is this self-healing, magical, substance that I wanted to kind of, even in the film and the book, what we want to do is say, to leave the viewer with the fact that hopefully after the film, you're just left with the next time you jump into a lake or turn on your tap, you just don't take it for granted. That there's something very profound there that's really important.
If you've got questions, you might like to head to the microphone there. Just form an orderly queue as they do at the writers' festivals and things. So if you want to just jump on up and go to the microphone, I'll take you when you're there. And this is this struck me a little bit as I was looking at it, and I thought, now I can't quite tell whether this is a beautiful natural object or something that's been covered in chemicals and turned into yellow and red trees.
No, it's totally natural, and that's just fungus on the trees, and that naturally occurs. And that's just in my neighborhood. That was, again, another project that I was supposed to be photographing in Africa in April of 2020, and I ended up isolating in my country place in that spring, and I had this new camera, and I was playing with it. It was like a 150 megapixel phase camera, and it's kind of like the next generation of high resolution digital cameras, but it had this neat feature. It's called focus stacking, and you can, something that you can't get in the depth of field normally. You can just say, okay, divide it and have the focus change and do a whole series of images, and then there's software that compresses it, so you can kind of create this infinite depth of field, from foreground to background. That wasn't really possible before. And to me, it was like I was looking at this and thinking Jackson Pollock kind of all overness, the kind of high density drip painting kind of, but everything in drip painting, everything's sharp. The first drips that would go down would be sharp as the last drips that would go on top. So this kind of idea of having complete depth of field, in these high dense, in the spring before the leaves come. And the structure, and I kind of kept looking at that as a kind of, the complexity and the kind of structure of these trees and brush and everything reminded me of our own, nervous system and vascular system and our neuronets. They all run in the same, so you're looking at this in nature, but you realize we're built of the same structures. That's what keeps us alive.
If you've got questions, you can join our excellent queue here. Are you the only curious person here tonight? I mean, come on, there must be more. Feel free to line up there. Yes, jump on the mic there, and hello, what's your name?
Hi, Anne is my name.
Hi, Anne.
I just want to say, first I saw Manufactured Landscapes when it first came out, and it still sticks with me today. It was so powerful. But you talk about farming and agriculture. I'm just wondering if you ever specifically direct that towards animal agriculture, which is one of the most devastating things towards climate change.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When I was doing the research on agriculture, I was actually, and it came in when I was doing the water project as well. When we look at human use of water, our number one human use of water is irrigation for agriculture. So if you look at all water for industrial and urban use is about 30% of all the water that humans use, and 70% of the water that's used by humans is used for agriculture. And of that 70% of water, 70% of that is used to create food for the animals that we eat. So effectively, out of a liter of water, 30% is urban, 20% is for the plants that we eat, and 50% are the plants that the animals that we eat. So that's kind of the breakdown. So I recognize that, and when you look at that, when I was flying over and looking at the pivot irrigation circles and all a lot of it was, sorghum and or just food for the animals. So 70% of all the agriculture you're looking at is for animals. So,
but I suppose you haven't been attracted to the feedlot or the field full of cattle or stock.
Well, I photographed that. I mean, it's one thing. Now, there's a subject that's really hard to get at. Nobody wants you into a chicken shed. Yeah. It's really hard. It's like I tried to get into the big industrial abattoirs and rendering plants and no go.
Yeah.
They just don't let you in. And I was actually going to do an exhibition of all the rejection letters that I had going. And they see no upside to letting me in. And I kind of thought, I did think that it's an interesting thing because I thought about it a lot, and I thought, if I wanted to go see where all our animals that we eat came from, even 50 years ago, I probably could have. Or 100 years ago, no problem.
Well, probably a lot of it was in town too. Like they would slaughter in town.
So there's, but it's when it got like industrial grade, when it got, like it became a big machine that, I think, and I've seen them, I've been in them, but they never let me shoot them. But it is, a big machine that's at work.
Yes, what's your name and question?
David, hi, thank you. Having, in your career, having seen so much behind the curtain from what I guess we see as consumers, if you will, of the world of man, created by man, has any of that impacted your own choices as, I guess, a consumer or just a person? And have you found your own work, influencing any of your own life in that way?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. Yes, it has. I mean, we're all implicated, including. So I'm not saying you can't exist today in the world, or very few can exist today in the world where you're not having some impact, that you're not partaking of the industrial kind of build out and infrastructure that we've created. So I'm trying to get my life such that I keep trying to think of leading my life in such a way that if, and I'm not perfect, but if like right now I've got, I've had an electric car before that I had hybrid cars, for the last 5 years. I have researched offsets, and there's a lot of controversy about them, but I have researched offsets and found kind of gold standard offsets, so that when you do use that offset, it is actually taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and if you want really clean, pure offsets without any question, it's like putting money into solar or wind farms is probably one of the safest things as an offset, because that is, converting, energy and preventing CO2 to be the driver of that energy. So I have a place that I eventually hope to retire to, but I've just put in a whole solar system, so it's totally off. I can go off grid completely if I want. I've got an electric car that I can charge and use as a way to get around without burning CO2. My diet. I'm Eastern European, and I admit that meat and potatoes was really, I grew up with it. It's very hard for me to get away from it, but I go eat more vegetarian and fish, and very, very rarely do I eat red meat. So I've tried to adjust. I think, as many of us have tried to adjust in a way and course correct in a way in my own life to have a lesser impact. But I fly, like I do use airlines a lot. I offset it all, and I research my offsets too. So in a way, I'm trying to do something that in my own mind, I think if everybody started doing this, we would rapidly start to reshape, the kind of demands that we're doing in the CO2 emissions. Because I see CO2 emissions as the loading of the atmosphere with CO2 emissions is, probably our single greatest existential threat in terms of what we're doing as a collective. And then, pushing back biodiversity, our human expansion, and, what we're doing with farmlands and what we're doing with, fishing the oceans and, reducing forests and ancient forests that have biodiversity in them. I think that's also a threat, above and beyond, other, all of nuclear war and things like that. Those are also serious threats. But in terms of the incremental things that we're doing as a collective species, how do we course correct? So I do see the, solar, wind, electric car, conservation of water, being more careful in the foods that we eat, and animal eating meat is a big problem. It's a huge problem because it's using up so much resource and so much land and so much water. So, and that's a toughie. And I do think that, again, we're moving more and more towards alternatives to that kind of a protein. And eventually, I think, we'll get it right somehow in the labs.
The chicken will be in the vat soon enough. Thanks, David. Thanks so much. Yes. What's your name? What's your question?
Hi, my name's Emily. I'm just interested from your earlier works and how you were using those larger format cameras and the technological advance we have today of like satellite imagery and those high definition aerial photos we can all capture through our computers. Has that impacted your work and the way you choose to capture your work in like a negative way or a positive way, or do you use those resources now to benefit how you find your locations and how you capture them as well?
I'm not sure if I fully understand, because I did back in when I worked with film cameras, it was a different way of working, but I think it really did train me. And then when I moved over to digital, it did train me to kind of continue to see and compose, because I found with film, there's a real commitment to materiality, but it also had a bigger impact on, there's plastic and silver and chemicals to bring it all forward, and then you got paper and more chemicals to make that. So it was fairly intensive kind of, and it was expensive. So when you shot with 8x10 or 4x5, you're really careful and really learn to compose and slow yourself down. So it was a very slow way of working. When digital started to transition and I started to do aerial, I had a hard time at the beginning because it just didn't feel like the kind of process and the kind of ritual that I developed in the early way of making pictures was hard to have that feeling that I didn't even feel at first that I was, making pictures, that I was doing something else with the digital camera. But when I started doing aerial work in 2006 and 2007, when I did the project here in Australia, it was really the beginning of my aerial work. And I found that the digital camera was far better at capturing in a moving aircraft than large format film. It was just
But were you asking about whether satellite imagery has an influence on?
Yeah, whether, I don't know how you operated back in like the 70s and 80s, if it was a word to mouth kind of thing where you went and traveled to a location because you learnt about it through a conversation, but now I can just get on Google and look up some random location.
Yeah. You could look at the mine from above on Google and then...
Well, I'm using that all the time now. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that when I get let's say I find an area on Google Maps of satellites, again, they'll never have the resolution that I would have by going in there with a 150 megapixel camera. So it can't do what I can do with a helicopter or a drone in that location. So that has had a profound, because before, it was kind of, in the early 80s, it was kind of ridiculous. I'd have I'd go to the government offices and look for mineral maps and say, oh, there's a lot of copper in this area, and then I'd drive to the area and say, any copper mines around here? You know, so
Any of them look really bad from above?
you know, so yeah, that has been a. Sorry, I didn't fully understand. That has had a profound kind of ability to, you know, search the world for potential subject. Yeah.
Look, a terrific question, and thank you so much. Are you queuing or standing? Just a couple of quick ones, if you could. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so you talked about the teacher who asked you to photograph human impact, and I'm just wondering, if you were thrown into the position of being a teacher now, what would you say to students?
Oh, good question. That's a good one. What would your assignment be for young Ed?
Well, I wouldn't be able to say evidence of man. It'd have to be evidence of human, because man is now incorrect.
Yeah.
Well, it is an interesting kind of question. You know, and I think there's just so many ways one can kind of approach, you know, the kind of issues that I've been kind of grappling with, and I think more and more artists are doing that. I mean, I think an assignment like that is, you know, it's still relevant, and as you said, it's not specific. It's very open-ended, and you can interpret it in 1,000 different ways, and any one person is going to find something else.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one. You know, like go photograph life. You know, photograph breath. Photograph. You know, it's the abstract nature of the photograph, the evidence of man that's so good about. What would yours be?
I'm throwing it at you.
Yeah, I love that.
But I think it's a great.
Well, it was interesting also because then you said how, you know, the zeitgeist caught up with you. And so here in your position now, to look at a student who's in that position of looking and, you know, maybe setting up something that where the zeitgeist could catch up to them. You know, how could you frame a question that might set up that kind of
go and photograph the future. Go and photograph the future.
Yeah, or you know, like, I mean, you know, find, you know, go out and photograph, you know, the kind of window or the way out of this, or like how do you, you know, what is the, you know, again, a possible future, a future that's one that's sustainable. Go out and photograph a sustainable future. Like what's that look like, or, you know, so that, because that is something that we need to do. We need to invent a future that we see as livable and worthwhile pursuing. And I think a lot of times people, I think, don't really feel that, oh, well, you know, what's a sustainable world look like? Does that mean I can't fly anywhere to see, you know, relatives in another country? Does that mean I can't eat meat? Does that mean, you know, I can't do this? It's all about what I can't do, you know, that I think a lot of people say, well, that's what a sustainable world is. Whereas I think I'd say
photograph hope.
Yeah, or hope, but like what world that keeps us in a sustainable envelope? You know, what would that look like? What does that world that's worth living? You know, that would be a good kind of future forward thing to start to photograph, because I think that world is here today. And I think it's possible. I think that world is possible. All the tools and all the ingredients and all the ideas and the know-how is here today. But we're just not implementing it at the rate we should be. And there's a lot of obstacles from entrenched interests. There's obstacles from political, you know, inability and inertia and getting voted back in again and making difficult decisions. And, you know, there's a lot of reasons why we're moving slowly and not quickly. So, but that you know, I mean, you know, show a future worth living. That puts us into a sustainable envelope.
We'd have to wrap it up at this point, but thank you for that excellent question, and I'm sorry we can't get to yours. But we'll finish off perhaps with this. Ed is now so modern. This is an image of Ed's that's very famous, of an intersection it's in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, Breezewood.
Pennsylvania. But Ed is, you know, perfectly at home in the modern world because he's now a meme. So people use the image of Pennsylvania in all sorts of ways as regular means. At the top, imagine what we could do with this land. Lewis, I can almost see it now, Clark. So it's the top image is taken from like a US history book of the sort of 1960s or 70s. And then the same image has been used again. People will really say socialist architecture is so depressing compared to that capitalist architecture, huh? So you must be feeling. Does it feel strange to see? Does it trivialise it in some way, or is this like, yep, great, it's getting out there, it's being used?
Well, I mean, that picture in particular. I was doing a whole project on oil, and so I was trying to, find one image that somehow sums up both two things: franchise and drive-through culture. And this was like, it took me a lot of research to kind of come to that. And even, that picture I went there with a scissor lift on the back of a truck that I rented. And it took me 3 days to figure out that picture.
Right.
I just drove around with that scissor lift and lifted myself up and down and try to find that moment. And finally, it was like the right lens, the right time of day, the right moment.
Right.
It was in actually a motel parking lot that I figured it out to have the scissor lift and got permission to keep the thing there and made that picture. And it is so, I think, it's interesting that it is like shorthand for like franchise, drive-through culture. It's become like a meme and it's used all the time. So, it is kind of interesting that, I'm very much of the, feeling or the thought that I want Gen Z and Gen Y and all of them to engage with it because this is their world, and I'm trying to kind of, when I get a chance to be in front of them, I say, don't blame the baby boomers for making this problem because you probably would have done the same given the same set of conditions. It's the population explosion.
They will never admit to that.
Who controlled the population explosion? It wasn't like nobody's controlling that. And that was a kind of predetermined arc of destiny for humanity. And so you can try and blame them, but that's not useful. It's how do we get out of this is useful.
Ed, fantastic. It's been great to meet you, and thanks so much for your generosity
Thank you.
this evening. Fantastic. Ed Burtynsky. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming along. There's a few more talks coming your way. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. here, Radical Change for a Net Zero Future. Craig Rucastle, along with Ed again and Natalia Isaacs, founder of Climate Action Movement 1 Million Women, and Deanna Calabout from Climate Change Investment and Advisory Form Pollination will be discussing. We'll be looking at the sort of hope, a solution-focused discussion on climate action. On Saturday, the 3rd of September at 11 o'clock here again, The Power of Photography. Daniel Browning will be hosting that with Ed again and Yan Zhang, who is the 2022 Australian Geographic Nature Photographer of the Year, and curator and artist Dr. Kristen Weiner of the National Museum will be here for that conversation at 2 p.m, Sustainable Fashion, the Next Frontier, and that's at 2 p.m. Obviously the well-dressed Ed's not in that one, unfortunately, but ABC's Edwina Throsby will be hosting a panel with Amy Lowe, Vice Chair of Social Outfit and designer Bianca Spender. You'll be receiving a survey as well, so the museum would love you to fill that out. This is compulsory now at every event. They'd like a survey, and give them 5 stars. Okay, it was a great ride, right? They got you right where you wanted to go. So thanks so much for coming along. It's been a terrific night. See you again. Bye bye. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.